Hey friends, it's Pastor Fevercorn here with you with Gospel Preview Friday. Um, Had a couple weeks out of the pulpit, back in. The last 2 weeks that I wasn't preaching, the readings for the Gospel were from John chapter 6, particularly the last half of that chapter. And it's called Jesus Bread of Life Discourse because it's where Jesus says one of his famous I am statements. He says, I am the bread of life. And then he goes on to say more. So the last 2 weeks were about that. This week is kind of the culmination of that teaching to finish out the speech, so to speak, where Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. And this actually offends the crowds. So I'm going to preach on that this weekend. And I hope I won't give too much of the sermon away, but it's going to sound a lot like what you're hearing today. And in fact, you're going to see a news headline similar to what you see here, although it'll be slightly different. I just saw this a long, long time ago, and I thought it was funny. Eat me, Jesus offends hometown seekers and followers. So it's kind of funny if a news reporter were catching wind of what was going on, maybe this is a headline that would be about the event. But it's true that there's a lot of things that Jesus says throughout the course of his ministry that don't sit well with people, that offend people. Usually it's because he's calling out the Pharisees or some other group of people for their sins. And of course, none of us like to be called sinners or to be point out where our faults are. That's usually why Jesus is rejected. And this time he's actually teaching about a great gift that he's giving the people, but they see it as too difficult to wrap their brains around. And so rather than reorient their thinking, they just reject Jesus' words altogether. Gets me thinking, how do we respond to the things Jesus has said? Maybe not just in the Gospels, because we're so familiar with those and we've learned them our whole life, and so we just accept them. But all of a sudden, what about a teaching that Jesus gave us that now pushes up against the status of our world today and what the world believes? Are we tempted to be offended by Jesus' words, or maybe to keep quiet, or maybe even, as I see so many young people doing these days, turning and walking away from the church because they don't want to accept what Jesus has given as the teaching? So that's a little bit about what we'll talk about. We'll wrap up this Bread of Life discourse. We'll have the first few days of school behind us, and I look forward to seeing you, as always, in worship this Sunday, where we can hear God's word. And we won't be receiving a sacrament this weekend, but of course, the week after that we will. So always make worship a priority in your life and your children's life. God's peace to you.